Hey guys, I'm Ashley.
And I'm Jordan. Welcome to the Be the Light Testimony Tuesday podcast, where people share their stories in hopes of sharing Jesus with others.
All right, guys, today we have Kyla, who is the owner of Be the Light, which is obviously who this podcast is through. So we're just going to turn it over to Kyla for just a little bit to introduce herself and to tell you a little bit about her testimony and her company.
So, I'm really excited. This is probably going to be as unstructured as more unstructured than anything else we do, but Be the Light is something that God has trusted me with. And I want to start by just sharing a little bit of background about who I am. Obviously, my name is Kyla Richardson. And growing up, I believed in God, but I had a very confusing picture of what it looked like to be a Christian. I grew up in what we now call broken homes. My parents divorced before I could even remember that they were married. And the man that my mom married after my husband was my father figure growing up. And we went to church, but it wasn't really consistent. We were holiday Christians. We went for Easter and Christmas, and, you know, if we had time on a weekend, we would go to church on Sunday. But it was never consistent. And around 10, 11 years old, they got divorced. And now I was old enough to kind of understand what was going on. So I witnessed a lot of that. Had a lot to do in forming my view even more. And as we moved forward, God was always just an afterthought. And that's what I understood it to be, was, yeah, we're Christians, we believe in God, and that's pretty much where it stopped. And that is what I kept my mind on pretty much for moving forward. When I graduated high school, I joined a performing group, and looking back, I kind of laugh because even the way all of that played out was an act of God for sure. We were living in Texas my senior year, and we moved back because my grandfather was sick and we needed to be closer to family again. And I was set. I'm like, all right, I'm going to college. When I graduate, I'm just going to do gen eds. I got all planned out. Don't even know what I'm going to college for, but I'm going to at least go and get my gen eds done. And
So no man.
Yeah, and my grandparents, we lived with them when we first moved back, until we were able to find a place and be more stable. And my grandfather is the best example that I could look at of what a man of God is. And they wanted us to start going to church with them. So we did. And I remember one weekend I really did not want to go. But my nanny said, nope, you're going. You have to. You have to come. And anyone that knows her will laugh because that is exactly how she talks. But she said, there's this group coming today called Recreation, and Katie Connor's going to be singing. She's in that group, which Katie Connor was like a celebrity in our high school. She had such an amazing voice, and I looked up to her from junior high through high school. It's a joke that I got her seat. My freshman year, she had graduated. So I had her seat in choir, and it was a big deal. But she had even reached out to me a few months before that and had seen a video of me singing and said I should come join this group. And I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. And I was like, okay, I'll go. So I'm sitting in the service, and I was just blown away. Their message, their mission to help veterans, to thank them for their service. I'm like, all right, well, I'm sold.
And you're about how old at this time?
I was 17.
Okay.
Yeah, I wasn't even 18 yet, and would not be 18 until that September. So this was, I was about to graduate high school. And I said, okay, I want to audition. And I talked to the director, excuse me. And on the spot, he had me do an audition. And I was like, oh, okay.
Talk about terrifying.
Yeah. And he said, okay, well, this was on a Sunday. He said, Tuesday, do you think you can come sing for my wife? Now, they lived 2 hours away from where I was.
Wow.
I had just gotten a car that I was able to drive by myself. And I'm like, I'm going to talk to my parents, but okay. I was supposed to go to Hack that Tuesday to tour the campus. So I was already not going to be in school for that day. My parents were like, okay, we'll go do the tour and then we'll drive up for your audition. And they really wanted me to join, but all of the spots were filled for that next year. So, okay, for the next edition, we want you to be already guaranteed as the first member of that edition. And I was happy with that. I was planning on still going to college for that first year. And I think I got a call maybe a month later. The girl that was in the group that was singing the same voice part as me was suddenly no longer going to be part of that edition. And this was weeks before they started doing like recording. And he calls me. I was sitting in English class, like I was in school, and I take this phone call and he's asking if I can make it up there for their first rehearsal the next week. And again, I'm like, I have to ask my parents, but sure, I would love to do that. And I was so excited. Oh man, I got up there. And this is where I know God was part of it. I was the same height as her. We looked very similar. Same shoe size. All of her costumes fit me. Like,
just all work.
Literally, I just fit in the place. It was crazy. And that year was the most formative. So this was the mission was for veterans, but it was a Christian-based organization. And Mary Muller, Jay was the director, and his wife was in charge of vocals. So they were this amazing team. Their house was at the top of the hill on the property, and we would all go up there to have dinner with the family. We'd go up there for our lessons. And I learned a lot about parenting in that year. Mind you, I was 17.
Yeah.
And there are lessons from that I still use with my own daughters today. And during a time where there was a lot of turmoil from my past coming up, a lot of things being revealed that I was not even aware of. I had stopped talking to my mom during that year. And they really guided me. And if I would have been in college that year, my life would have gone a completely different direction. But I got a chance to really learn about God and really learn what that meant to live a Christian life. I was given an example to look at of what that could be. And while it still wasn't a main focus in my life, that was a turning point for sure. Yeah. I found a lot of passion in singing, and I thought, man, this year was great. I'm ready to move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
I'm ready to start my life now, and I went into cosmetology school. I met my oldest daughter's father, and I want to say at one point I actually dropped out. I took a break from cosmetology for about a month, and it was because I didn't have a car. I lived 45 minutes from campus, and my attendance was just dropping very rapidly. So I took that month and I worked full-time, third shift. I walked 2 miles. I feel like, you know, the stories when your grandparents tell you how, like, they got to school. That legitimately was what it was like. It was like midwinter. I'm walking 2 miles to Giant in the middle of the night and 2 miles home in the morning. It's freezing cold.
And at this point, you're what, like 19, 20?
19, yeah.
Okay.
About 18, 19 years
Oh
old.
my gosh.
Saved enough in that month to get a car and got back into school. And I'm going to say a few months later, I found out I was pregnant with my oldest daughter. And my relationship with her father had already been rocky. And because my relationship with my own father was non-existent, I remember saying to him the moment I found out I was pregnant, if you don't want this, if you want to leave, do it now. And that was my mindset, not even about our relationship. It was just because of my own experience.
It's hard.
And he was all for it. There were a lot of things throughout that I had been lied to in the beginning, and had said things of like, you know, if you repeat those things, we're gone. That actually turned into a very abusive relationship. And I thank God for my daughter every day, because if I would have had a son, it would have been different. But because I had a daughter, remembering what I experienced growing up and looking at her, I was like, this can't be what's normal to her. Like, I don't want her growing up and thinking this is normal too. And
you didn't want her to experience the trauma you had.
Yeah. And at the same time, I didn't want her to lose a relationship with her dad either. So I was like, I'm going to remove us, but I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that she still has that relationship.
Was that the moment, like, was that a turning point for you where you were able to reflect on your own growing up?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, that, it changed a lot. It gave me purpose. Because at this point I had gone from a year of feeling so much purpose and going out and thanking veterans to, what am I doing with my life?
You're like, I'm working at Giant. And
right, I'm working at Giant, I'm in school, and I really don't even have a clear picture of what's going on here, but I'm 2 hours away from my family. And really, I'm a professional at isolating, I'll tell you that. And that's something that God continues to work on in me, but obviously that didn't work out. And I then met my second daughter's father, and, you know, he also did not live here, but he moved here from Texas. Very fast relationship. My mom, unexpectedly, I really did not expect her to do this, but she offered to bring him into her home. So we all lived in my mom's like 2-bedroom apartment. And I love my mom. And at that point, our relationship was still kind of rocky. And it got to a point where I was like, I would rather be living in a hotel until we can get an apartment than deal with this anymore. And at 21 years old, with a not even 1-year-old daughter, I became homeless. And it's important to note, this was by choice. This was because of my decisions and my choices, but we lived in hotels for a couple months. At one point, there was a coworker of his that invited us to stay in her living room. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is such a blessing. Like, this is coming at an amazing time. And the third night we stayed there, I was woken up in the middle of the night, and the trailer literally right next to hers was on fire. So now we were displaced again. The owner of that trailer, she was also displaced, obviously, but that next week I found out I was pregnant with my second daughter.
So much in
And
such a short span.
so much. And that's the crazy thing, is my life has always been a series of very fast, like, the best word that always comes to mind is whirlwind. Like, each point just feels like it happened so quickly. And because I didn't have Jesus, there was nothing to focus on.
At this point, you're just in your own mess.
Yeah,
That's
it's
how you
just
feel.
going. Like,
Yeah.
and there's nowhere to turn to look. I didn't have guidance. And yeah, it really affected. It really affected my decisions.
When you found out you were pregnant with your second daughter, how was that experience, finding that out so soon after in that situation that you were in? What was that like? Like, what were your emotions? Take me through that, because
I think it was like a light. It was like, it gave me hope. Something positive was happening in the midst of all of this chaos and negative. And literally that next week, I also found out from my job. At this point, I was teaching cosmetology, and I found out that a position opened up full time. So I would no longer have to work 2 jobs, or have to travel to different locations to substitute. So I had a full-time position available, and I was so just thanking God. Like, I don't even go to church at this point, but I'm like, oh my gosh, at least something.
Yeah.
Something is happening. I know we're moving in the right direction. We lived in a hotel for about another month until our tax refund came, and we used that to get an apartment. And then COVID hit. And I was, 4 or 5 months pregnant at that point, freaking out. Like, I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I had to go pretty much through that pregnancy alone because no one was allowed in offices.
Yeah.
So I had to go to appointments by myself, and it was definitely stressful. Added a lot of stress to that situation, but we continued to be okay. There was addiction involved, and I finally got to the point where I recognized it was addiction, and I gave an ultimatum of, you can get help and make changes, or I'm not going to be able to continue this relationship. So we ended up breaking up, and I remember telling God, all right, that's it. I'm going to be a single mom for life. Like, I don't want anybody. I want it to be me and my girls, and we're just going to take on the world. And
at this point, obviously you're praying.
Yeah.
Where is your relationship with God in this moment?
I think that started to rekindle it. Because every moment, it's funny how I don't seek him, but then every moment where I feel panic, like, just that natural instinct is to pray.
I honestly think that's something every human has.
Yeah.
Because
I was
that's how we're
talking
made.
about that with my friend. Like, literally every single person, atheist, agnostic, Christian, Muslim, as soon as you get in a moment where you're like, oh no, that's the first thing you do is you just start praying. Sometimes I feel like we didn't even always know who we're praying to.
Yeah.
You're just hoping.
Is that how you felt?
Yeah, it's like that moment where if my belief is true, and if God really is God, then give it a shot. Like, this is just where I'm at.
So did you feel like you knew who God was, or no? Like, did you feel like you didn't know who he was and you just, were praying for help?
I knew of God.
But you didn't know him.
Right.
Right.
I had never really read the Bible. Other than, passing scriptures that people would bring to you, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Very uninvolved on my part.
And then just to clarify, how far along in your pregnancy were you at that point when you two split up?
5 or 6 months pregnant.
Okay.
Yeah. And it really was, he came, I had given the ultimatum, but then he had come to me and said, I'm not ready for this type of commitment. And I actually laughed because I'm thinking, it's about 6 months too late for that.
Yeah.
But okay.
You're wrong.
Okay. And I was dead set on not dating, just going to be a single mom the rest of my life. And then God placed my picture on my now husband Micah's People You May Know on Facebook. He spent about 3 weeks trying to convince me to go on a first date with him. And I'd be like, well, why don't we just FaceTime? Like,
Valid.
we'll just FaceTime. He's like, okay. Finally convinced me to go on a date, and so glad I did, because obviously we're now married.
Yeah.
And that was in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
We were together for about a month before Ellie was born.
Mm.
And her biological father had decided just not to be part of her life at all. Mm. So Micah has really been, he is her dad. He's been there since birth, and very grateful that she gets to have that relationship. But I was very standoffish. I mean, I had gone through 2 very traumatic experiences back to back, and did not trust anyone at this point, let alone someone that was trying to date me. Yeah. But I was very adamant that we weren't going to live together. Unfortunately, her father was still living in that apartment, and I was waking up every morning to just being screamed at. And Micah finally got to the point that he's like, you're not going back. Like, you need to just get your stuff out and go, because if not, I'm not going to be able to handle listening to what you're going through and not do something about it.
Yeah.
And we did. So I reluctantly moved in with him and started building our relationship, and we, 6 months in our relationship, got pregnant with our 3rd daughter, because we are insane. But we got engaged and married later that year, and it felt like no matter what was thrown at us, I could lean on him. And one day we woke up, he went to work, and around lunchtime, he got a phone call that his best friend, Graham, had passed. Mm. And it was just, the only thing I can describe is disbelief. Yeah. Like, no, he didn't. Like, I think we kept asking that same question of, is it real? Like, did this really happen? But that moment was my turning point. That moment was really when I started asking questions and came back to God. And that's it. It's so crazy how something so negative can make so many good things happen.
Something so beautiful.
And it's such a blessing when you can find the good that comes out of bad.
Well, I feel like that's all I hear in your story. The whole time you're talking, I'm like, you didn't know it at the time, obviously, because you didn't know God. But, like, as you're speaking, all I can see is just little glimmers that God was like...
That reflection. Like, being able to reflect and see the overview of things now is, like, I can be so thankful for those things.
Yeah, he was working on your behalf even when you didn't...
For sure.
You weren't seeking him.
And I just started questioning, because Graham's father is a pastor. Okay. And I'm like... Well, did he know God? Because he was not living a lifestyle like he knew God. So I'm questioning, like, does he know God? Is he in heaven? And did he know Jesus? If I passed today, would my kids or the people that love me know the answers to those questions? And I looked at Micah and I was like, we're going to church. Like, it was just decision made. We're going to church. And we found a home church literally right down the street from us, LCBC, and I was able to get involved in serving there quickly and got back to singing, which I hadn't done in 4 or 5 years at this point. Yeah. I had kind of abandoned something that was such a dream and a passion of mine from being a young kid. Mm-hmm. So having an opportunity to like revisit that, and it was a healing. I mean, I'm getting on stage and singing worship, but it was, like, personal. Like, it was helping me heal. And I'm so glad that I stuck with that. Like, I'm so glad that I continued serving. And even through the many storms that came after that, we just kept serving. And our fourth daughter, a week before I was supposed to be induced, my husband had a seizure at an amusement park. So you can only imagine what this looked like to people walking by.
Yeah.
We were in a bathroom and getting the girls ready to go on the boardwalk, and he just didn't feel good. And he stopped responding to me, so I turned around, and I had never seen a seizure, but Jesus was there because I knew what was happening, and I was able to get him to the ground before he actually started seizing, which that in itself is a blessing because he could have been injured in so many other ways. But there were enough people going by that we were able to get help quickly, and we got him care quickly. But fun fact, when you have a seizure reported in Pennsylvania, sure other states too, but you're unable to drive for 6 months. You have to be seizure free for 6 months. And as someone who was going to work operating forklifts and heavy machinery, same lines. So he couldn't work either. And it's very hard to be vulnerable and ask for help. Pride can get in the way. But we did, and we started asking friends and family because that's what your mind goes to first. But his mom asked me, "Have you talked to your pastor?" And I was like, "Why? Why would I do that?" Like, what would I do that for? But I did, and I explained what was going on, and they stepped in, and they took care of our car insurance to make sure that I could continue doing DoorDash, and that was our income at that time. So I started really seeing and learning how powerful community was and how necessary it was, which, again, I can look back on, and if I would have had that in those other instances, things may have been different.
Yeah.
But I learned that piece at the right time. And I started searching for groups to be a part of, told myself it was for my kids. I kept coming up with the excuse, oh, I'm just trying to find ways for them to socialize and make friends, and it really was for me.
So now at that time, you're going to church, obviously, you're serving, you're doing the worship. Are you seeking God personally yet? Or
No.
are you, okay, that's what
No, I think there were, again, verses here and there. In moments where I was struggling, I would try to seek out verses that would help. But that was the extent of it.
Still not quite personal yet.
Yeah.
Getting there.
And I still didn't really have, like, any one-on-one guidance or anyone discipling me.
Okay.
So I was kind of, at this point, searching for that.
Yeah.
Did you feel like, because I remember you said about how you wanted your daughters to know where you would go if you were to pass away. Did you feel like you going to church was like the answer? Was that like kind of why you were going? Was like, okay, well, at least if I pass away, like they're gonna know because I go. Like, is that how you?
Yeah, felt? It was kind of like the building a routine because I felt at that moment, at least if we are going to church consistently, that wasn't something that I did as a kid.
Yeah.
So it might be. Yeah.
So I was like, maybe they'll get enough in the message each week that this is it. And at the same time, Evelyn, our oldest daughter, was starting to really sing and, like, remember lyrics to words. So Cardi B was not an option. And we changed our radio station in the car to Air One, and it has not changed since that day. So the only music my kids listen to and sing now is worship music. And
Jesus was slowly pulling your
yeah, it was like we were taking baby steps. We were getting there.
Okay.
And then I met someone else serving on the worship team at our church. He introduced me to his wife, who was running a ministry, and I went to a meetup for the first time, and it was the first time that I had gone to any type of group setting like that. And I felt comfortable. I didn't feel anxious. My kids were having fun. They felt comfortable. Yeah. And that was like that next step. It was like finally we found the puzzle piece of community, and we're going to start building and growing in that area. Yeah. And I became very involved. It was such a blessing because it was focused on helping women who had gone through the same things that I had gone through. Yeah. So I had such a passion. Excuse me. Okay. I had such a passion in that, and I thought, you know, at least if I can help others have community in a time where I didn't, it would like help heal me and make up for the fact that I didn't have it then. And fortunately and unfortunately, because I don't believe in regrets. I don't believe that anything negative that happens has to be negative. Yeah. I feel like I know that God takes everything and finds purpose for it no matter what. Yeah. At this time, my husband is still grieving. And I was more growing towards God than he was. So it caused a rift. It caused a lot of challenges for us at that time. And when I'm sorry, I got distracted because the light went off.
That's okay.
I became very close with the original,
leader.
The original, yeah. So I became very close with the original leader of that ministry. And unfortunately, I was just only taking advice from one person. And I wasn't really asking God. I was just asking that person. Yeah. And because I had comfort in a way that I hadn't experienced in my life before, it's like you just lean into it. Yeah. So I was really I was looking for answers in one person, and I got comfortable in a relationship that I hadn't experienced in any ways in my life before. And because of that, again, I isolated. I convinced myself I wasn't because I was talking to one person, but that's still isolation. And ultimately, it led up to my husband and I separating. And during that separation is when I really formed my relationship with Jesus. I started journaling. I started a journal during that separation, and I mean, every emotion I was feeling, it was just all written out, and it was all letters to God and scriptures that he was giving me. Like, you can see where I'm asking questions, he's responding with verses, and then I'm responding again, and it was this continual thing, and that's where I really cultivated that relationship. I had never experienced anything like that before. And also, during this, it even got to a point that my mind had convinced me that I was back in my previous relationships. My mind had convinced me that my husband was in the same category as those people. And now I can look back and realize it was pretty much a 2-month-long PTSD episode where I was it was never ending because I was being triggered every single day, multiple times a day. Yeah. And I got to the point one Saturday night, I woke up at 2 a.m. and like, well, I'm awake, so I guess we're just going to start reading the Bible because I can't go back to sleep. Yeah. And he took me to 2 Samuel 22, and I wrote out every single word of that chapter in my notebook. And it described exactly how I felt. Like, it was like that was written from my perspective in that moment. And I had also been doing a devotional in the Bible app, which was 31 days, 31 days to divorce, basically. And I opened up that days. I opened up that days and it was titled Reconciliation. And after reading it, I sent my husband a message, who at this point I had a PFA against. Even now I don't understand how it was granted, because there was no real evidence. Like, there was nothing that actually happened. It was just, my fear was so convincing to not only me, but those around me at that point, that it did go through, and it was temporary. But I sent him a message and asked him to meet us at the park where we not only went on our first date, but where he also proposed to me. And I knew he wasn't going to respond. But I just prayed, and I went. And after church that day, I took the girls to the park, and I just prayed and just was like, God, please let him come. Like, just please encourage him to come. And he did. And we went on a drive, and I had him read through my journal, because at this point, I now understood his perspective, and I understood what he was viewing and seeing through all of that. And I needed him to see my perspective. Yeah. So he could understand that, like, those were never my true intentions, and it was really coming from a place of fear. So thankfully, we reconciled, and through that, God gave me the title to my book. That was it. I just kept coming to mind was Raising Daughters. And I'm like, okay.
You're like, what am I doing?
We're raising daughters.
Yeah.
And that turned into me sitting down, and I prayed and asked the Holy Spirit, please just help me write this book. And I spent 24 hours and wrote the entire first draft of my book in that 24 hours. And to explain a little bit, it is my testimony, more in depth of what I'm sharing today, but each chapter title is each of my daughters' names. Oh. And kind of like the markers of each season of my story and what led to this. And my passion for worship and singing was reignited, and I got so excited. I'm like, yes, I am going to go out and I am going to share my story and I'm going to sing and we're going to travel as a family.
And God's like, what?
And God was like, that's great. That's good. I like that, but bigger. Yeah. And really helped me come to the realization that I can share my testimony, and it is going to be powerful, but it's only going to reach single moms. Yep. It's only going to reach women who have been through domestic violence. Mm-hmm. Like, it's a very specific group of people that it will bring to Jesus. Yeah. But if I can change my focus to sharing as many stories as possible from as many different people as possible, oh my gosh, so many more people would come to Jesus. Because it really, a lot of the times it comes from a feeling of isolation, where you feel like you're the only one, or you feel like you're alone in it. But something I learned was you're never alone, and you're never an isolated incident. You're not the only person that tripped walking up the steps. You're not the only person that left an iron on when you left the house and forgot. Like, simple things that I think a lot of times when we think testimony, we think that it has to be this huge story of this amazing thing that God did, when a lot of times it's just the little details throughout your day, and just knowing that you're not alone in it. Yeah. And that really started the passion for Be the Light, which I had started coaching, Christian coaching, which I thought going into was Christian counseling, by the way. Fun fact. It is not. I met Sarah Lindsay, who is the owner of Women of Destiny, Christian coaching and business women. And she helped me see and find vision, something that I had suppressed for a large majority of my life. And it was really cool. It was really cool to come up with a hypothetical business plan of like, oh yeah, this would be a great idea, but I had no intention of doing anything with it.
Yeah.
And it just happened to end up being what this is today, Be the Light. And it's really just about being that light for other people, being a witness for what God has done for you privately and thanking him publicly for it. And I'm so thankful. Like, it's just such a feeling of gratitude, which is so crazy. And all of the moments over the last few months where I have felt like I'm not enough, like I am nowhere near qualified. I don't even have a laptop. Like, literally everything has come from my phone. Yeah. And not only did God encourage me through scripture, but he also placed each of you around me. He placed the exact people who do have the knowledge and do have the experience in the areas that I don't, to make it all of this a reality. Yeah. And that's the really, really cool part, is, again, reminding me that I'm not meant to do it alone, reminding me how important community is in every aspect of life, whether it's personal community, church community, work. Like, it is just so important to be surrounded by other people who understand you, other people who are different than you. And yeah, I think that's a really, really cool thing.
I like that. So something I don't think you really touched on yet. Well, you did a little bit, but I'm just going to ask a more in-depth question. In that time when you were separated and you were really digging deep with God, how would you say your relationship changed from, obviously, like, you were seeking God a tiny bit to being on fire for God? What do you think changed for your heart, your mind, your relationship to get a personal, deep relationship with Jesus?
So as much as I do not like the fact that we were separated, it was definitely necessary in my development of my relationship, because I started focusing less on making my husband and my kids happy and taking care of all the things, and really taking that time to date Jesus. Like, when my kids would go to bed at night, I would spend that 2 hours in the Word with my worship music on. And that was kind of like God making the time. Like, he was tired of me having the excuse that I don't have time. So he made time, and I had a lot of it, to really sit and learn and just, take that time of solitude. Take that time to focus on nothing but Jesus, with no distraction. And I have severe anxiety. I have what is called PNES. It's like psychogenic non-epileptic seizures. They basically look like seizures, but it's just like a panic attack that gets to that point. Like, it just gets to the point that you lose all control of your body. Okay. There's no cure for that. However, worship music, that, since I have made the change of having worship music playing in my house all the time, the anxiety's gone. Because the enemy hates worship. Yeah. He doesn't want to hear it. He doesn't want it sang. He doesn't want it played. So the more you fill your environment with worship, the further away he gets, the less control he has. And that was another big key for me, learning how much power there is in worship and how important that truly is. And I was struggling because I felt like my prayer life was not up to par of what I would think it should be.
Mm-hmm.
And that was when Sarah said to me, well, you worship. I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, well, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. And that allowed me, having that worship playing, took that stronghold away, and I was able to pray. It was like I needed that as the gatekeeper to be able to have enough peace to really get into prayer. And through practice, it's not a struggle anymore. The girls laugh. They think it's so funny. Even when we're driving, because I used to have really bad road rage. I used to get so angry and so upset with people. And let me tell you, it's hard to get angry when you're listening to worship music. When that's playing constantly, it's hard to get angry because you're reminded of why we need to think about those things. So I started praying for people instead. And someone cut me off. And the one day I said, God, please help them get to where they need to go safely. And they obviously are just struggling with their time management today. So we're just going to pray that they get where they need to go on time. And the girls were like, who are you talking to? And I was like, Jesus. Oh. I was like, yeah, we pray for people. We pray for others. And it's been so cool that through my own journey of learning, it's also teaching my daughters. Yeah. And they're learning, and I see the effects in their lives. And all of the bad stuff that has happened is worth it, knowing that the outcome is that they do get to grow up with these things. And they do get to have that foundation that I didn't. It's just peaceful. Like, I have dealt with depression, anxiety, PTSD throughout most of my life. And I'm 26. Yeah. And through our separation and through all of that, I actually was diagnosed and learned about complex PTSD. So when you think of PTSD, you think of like war. Yeah. And it's usually a one-time event. Complex PTSD is when you have multiple traumas over a long period of time.
And you just had one thing after the other.
Yeah, it just kept going. Which I can laugh about now, because I can see that purpose. But when I was told what the possibilities for treatment of complex PTSD, one of them is exposure therapy. Mm-hmm. Which, to be honest, really scared me, freaked me out. Because during that, you kind of like talk through your story until you get to a point where you're like too worked up and you can't. And you just slowly keep working past that. And what I have found, and what's really cool, is God has also used this business to heal me. And instead of going through those therapies, it sounds so funny because when I think about it now, it honestly would be easier to just go through the therapy. But instead, I am sharing my testimony. And each time that I share it, it gets easier. And each time that I share it, I look real calm right now. But it's the after effects of a trigger. Yeah. So each time that I've shared it, my period of like rest and like the bounce back, that time is getting shorter and shorter, which is where I can tangibly see God healing. And I can tangibly see like that therapy in a way, just a lot more publicly than how most people would do it. But I'm thankful. I'm just grateful for all of the ways, big and small, that God has used every part of this journey to really just do his thing, do what he's great at. And I have the privilege to share that with others and hopefully encourage them to do the same thing, because it is scary. It is scary to share, but it's worth it. It really is.
One more. Well, from me. I know Ashley asked you about what it was like during your separation with your husband. I'm curious about what your relationship, because I like that you said you had time to date Jesus. So what did your dating Jesus look like, and how did you navigate that once you and your husband did reconcile? Because obviously you were on like sort of different pages almost.
Yeah.
So what did that look like going forward?
So going forward, it was kind of like I now knew how important it was to make that time. So I will get up either an hour or two before my kids usually do, and that'll be my Jesus date time. Or I will, after they go to bed at night, I just stay up for another hour or so and really get in that time. And no matter what, when I wake up, I'm praying, and I'm at the very least reading the verse of the day in the Bible app. Because as a mom, every day is different. You don't ever know what to expect. Sometimes there really isn't a lot of time in the day to spend time with Jesus, but I'm at the point in my journey and relationship with him now that he's involved in every part of our day. Mm-hmm. So even if I don't get that one-on-one time with him, I now have him throughout the day, that it's okay. It's not detrimental to my mental health and my relationship with him if I'm not able to spend it a full hour, but just I have a better appreciation for how important making time really is.
I love that.
So I think the last thing that I would ask you is, since you're sharing your testimony, what do you hope that people would get from your message? What do you want people to take away from your message?
I think the biggest thing, and I said it already, was that no one's an isolated incident. I think there's so much power in testimony, and it gets overlooked a lot. A lot of times we think about sharing our testimony and we think about baptism.
Yes.
But I really want Be the Light to kind of change that and change that idea and help people know that it goes beyond that. Yeah. Sharing your testimony is so important, even in your everyday. When you see someone going through a struggle or something that you've already experienced, just leaning in and helping them not feel alone. Because that's really what it is. Testimony is helping others feel connected, feel like they're not alone. And yeah, I would just encourage anyone to take that step. While it is scary and it can be intimidating, just encourage to always be open and be willing to share what Jesus has done.
Awesome. I love it. Do you have anything else? All right. Well, we're just going to say thanks, Kyla, for sharing your testimony. It was really great just getting a chance to get to know you more and just to hear your story, parts of it that we didn't even know. So yeah, we just want to say thanks for sharing your testimony and coming on. And just for everyone listening, we just want to remind you guys that your testimony and your story is the most important thing that God's given you. That's unique to you. No one else has it. So just share it as much as you can and change someone's lives. Thanks, guys.